Hey, Christina here. Welcome to my crystal art series. Today I'll be sharing my process behind Harmonious Growth artwork. Let's go. So I normally start my projects off with a mood board looking for references that are going to help guide this artwork to an interesting piece and an interesting connection to a story. So my inspiration behind this piece really fell upon looking at leaves, looking at tree bark, as well as edging of stone cliffs. I also looked at spotting on leaves. I kind of liked how the texture was on the leaves. I looked at broken glass to see what type of shapes I can create in a interesting pattern. I looked at different shades of green and gold, and then I obviously looked at the jade stone and what its characteristics are. And through all of this inspiration, I was definitely gearing more towards a plant type inspiration here. So really looking back to nature again and really exploring the type of shapes that nature has in its environment already. And for me, I'm just emphasizing that. So looking at the jade stone and seeing what type of designs I see within the stone, I saw a lot of leafy green imagery in my mind. I also saw a lot of different veins, so veins in a leaf, as well as different shades of green, which could be mint green, yellowish green, different types of green to really accentuate the meaning of jade, because jade has pretty much only green in there. But for the reason of gold was through my exploration of looking at references of jade, I did notice that in some of the natural stones of jade that they also have a little hint of gold within it. So I thought to accentuate that in this piece. And from that, I'm going to take you through my process on Procreate. So in Procreate, I started with the monoline brush tool to lay out my shapes. I was inspired by the veins of the leaf and created this interesting composition, but I wanted to have this composition really embrace the feeling of going up, because that's what growth means. We're going up. So I wanted to really make sure that this composition was speaking to that. And the composition you see here, it kind of goes up and to the right. And normally that in design, that is more of a positive thing. Going left is not so positive, and going down is obviously not so positive. So up and right is what we're doing to express a topic or express a feeling of positivity and energy. That's just from what I discovered through my studies. Now, the next thing that I like to do here is, after adding in the composition, the line work, and laying out what these shapes will be, I start adding in its base colors. So, but before I even talk about the base colors, I make sure that all the shapes are evenly spaced out, but also balanced in a way that it's not heavy on one side. You see here that on the far side to the bottom, there's a big piece that's really thick, and it's pretty much one piece. So on the other side, I have smaller pieces that are equal to that piece in the bottom right, because I want to create that balance. And these shapes are very organic, and I kind of took the inspiration from that tree bark picture that I had, really bringing in, shapes within shapes type of effect, because I thought that was really neat, and it was something that I've never tried within the Crystal Art series, so I thought to introduce a shape within a shape concept, and I thought it was rather neat. So now, after finalizing all the shapes and pretty much the composition, I started to lay out the base colors. So focusing on greens, but focusing on what type of greens that Jade has within its stone, because I saw through Jade references that it looks a little bit emerald-like, but then the value scale from emerald dark green to a mint green. So I kind of stayed within that frame, but brought in some slightly warmer tones too, because I wanted to keep things really positive and not so cold looking. So pushing it a little bit further here, like I told you about seeing some gold within the natural stone of Jade, I wanted to bring that in, so that rust color within the stone, and that would kind of accent some of the greens. So it's not so monotone-y, like it has some interest and it has some contrast. So next, it was all about bringing in texture. So the spotted leaf was something that caught me, and in my head I knew of a brush in Procreate that could make this happen, as well as the bark inspiration. So I looked at some texture brushes that could match that. So I first came in with a brush called Aurora, and it has a very cool feature that it has splotchy effects within the brush, and I thought that making those splotchy edges on each of the shapes would really connect with that inspiration of the white spots on the leaf inspiration to really make this piece interesting. And I know within Jade there also has that type of texture within it. That's kind of what I saw within the stone. And then on each shape I came in with a little bit more of a softer brush, and the brush that I used was cotton. And the reason why I use this brush was because I just wanted to create some depth within these stones so that the colors didn't look really flat, and it mixed well with the Aurora brush that I put over top. So that was the reason why I put that in there. And then next was using the reed brush tool to add a gold accent to the edging of each shape, and I brought in that rusty gold color for that contrast, and also flow of direction. So your eye is moving in a clockwise position, so that, counterclockwise position, so that your eyes are flowing within the piece. So I used another spotty texture in the bottom right section of the piece, and this brush was called Kohl. And this brush was a little bit more of a subtle brush, but it still kind of balanced off, the big shape with the little shapes on the side. But the little shapes had a little bit more of a heavy texture compared to this really big one. I didn't want it to compete, but I wanted to show where you would start in the piece, where your eyes would go, and where it would finish. So within the yellow shapes, I used a terrelay brush to create an interesting highlight within the accent color. That was basically the shape within a shape, and I wanted to just bring in some interest and more textures to mimic that branch look effect. Used the reed brush next to create a thick gold line to bring some depth to the piece, some variety, because most of the lines in the piece were rather thin. And then some of the line work within the piece was more of a shape because it was that thick, so I needed to really bring in a different type of line. So next is the black outline, I softened the shade to a light gray to make a softer look, because the blacks within this piece seem to make everything look really heavy and harsh. So bringing in a softer gray outline helps to really clean up this piece and to soften it up and focus more on the shapes itself than basically bringing in a harsh line to cut corners and make things very hard to look at. So now lastly, I created some more contrast by coming in with a reed brush to break up the shapes. And the reed brush this time I used white. Now this was just a last thought effect, but you let me know in the comments to see if this was a right choice or not. But I thought it would be an interesting highlight to break up the shapes a little bit. So now this is pretty much done, and I'm going to take this into Illustrator now to prep. So taking this into Illustrator now, so I made a new artboard, sized it to 8.5 by 11, and I made 2 rectangular boxes that are sized to 4 by 6 inches. I put these 2 boxes back to back, and I drew a line down the middle, and that became my guide to where the middle of the card was going to be. And from there, I merged the 2 shapes together using the Pathfinder tool to make it one shape, because now I have the guide that tells me where the middle is. Then I brought in my line tool to bring in some crop marks on each corner of the card. And then in the middle, where I put that guide, I also marked a line at the top and a line at the bottom to show where the fold is going to be when I print it. So I brought in my image now and I placed it on the right side, and that is basically the front of the card. And I put all my details on the back of the card, because that's where the back of the card will be when it's folded. So everything else here is done, and I save it out as a PDF, and it's going to be ready to print on cardstock. Now that I printed out my card, we are taking it to my drafting table, where I'm going to be using my scoring board to score my card where the fold is going to be. So I take it to my drafting table and I take out my scoring tool. I score the top on art side up, so I see where things line up, and then I turn it around so that I'm not damaging my artwork in any way, and I go down the card, lightly pressing to make an indent down the card. When that is complete, I then move that to a side, and I use my cutting board to line up my crop marks and my ruler to keep things straight, and I use my X-Acto knife to cut it to size. And once that is all done to cutting size, I take my bone tool, which helps with cleaning up my fold. So I run the bone tool lightly along the fold line to keep it seamless and clean. All right, we're almost done. So I want to add a little bit of interest to this piece. So I came in with gold metallic paint to bring some life to the piece and some idea of minerality, and only highlighted gold sections of the piece within the thick line in the bottom section, and to balance it with thin small gold lines to highlight from the top section to balance it. I didn't want to go too crazy with foiling and anything like that. I just wanted to hint some things. And then I got some silver paint, so I thought to try it out. And what I wanted to do was highlight a little bit of areas within the card. So there's some thin silver lines within each shape. So I came in with a very thin brush and outlined some of those areas so that it didn't look too flat. And it brought a little bit of dimension and a little bit of other colors too, because I've been using gold a lot in some of my cards, and I thought to bring in some silver to shake it up a little bit. And now we're all done. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and for letting me share the process with you guys. I hope that you guys have a wonderful day and keep smiling. Bye.